I'm Karen Covell, and I'm so glad you're joining us today for our new episode of the podcast Hollywood Changemakers. Today, I am so excited to introduce a friend who is just an inspiration to me, writing about films, loving films, and challenging people to actually listen and talk to films. So this is Elijah Davidson. Elijah, I am so glad you're here. Elijah is the co-director of Brehm Film at Fuller Seminary, and he is coming today to talk to us about his passion of films. And I am so glad you're here. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, it's a joy. Thank you for having me.
Well, you are a dad of 2 children.
Yeah.
You are trying to balance everything in life. Where did you get that passion for films?
That came from my parents. I grew up in a very small town in north central Texas. So, and by small, I mean like 700 people out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, just a very small town.
So did you grow up in a Christian home?
I did. Yeah, I did. My parents are both very firmly committed Christians, have been for almost their whole life. And they raised us that way too. You know, like I said, in our town there was school, or there was church, or there was staying home watching movies. So we did a lot of church time too. You know, I have a lot of friends who grew up in Christian homes, but it was a more restrictive environment than what we grew up in. My parents are both very open and generous people, and like generous intellectually, you know, and were very willing to, you know, be with us as we explored and experienced things. You know, they were definitely with us, but allowed us to explore and experience the world. They
sounds like no fear.
Yeah. I think what it really comes down to with them, I thought a lot about this as an adult. Like, why were they this way? Because it's not normal.
It's not.
I'm so grateful for it. And I remember once when I was a kid, so in this town of 700 people, there were 13 churches in this town.
Whoa.
Yeah, a lot of churches, and some that were the same denomination as one another. You know?
Oh, my goodness.
And I asked my mom one time when I was a kid, I was probably, 11 years old, something like that. I said, you know, why are there so many churches here? And she gave me the best answer. So she could have said something like, well, you know, those people got mad at those people, so they broke off that church and started this one over here, and then they got mad, so they started this church over here. She could have given me an answer like that.
Yeah.
She didn't. She said, she told me, she said, God is bigger than any of us can understand, and we need different perspectives on God to know God better. And so that's why there's different churches, because everyone has a different perspective on God, so we need each other.
That's a great answer.
It's a really great answer, yeah, and just very typical of who they are, which is they have that firm belief that God is bigger than any of us, and God is, you know, though I'm sure they had the urge to want to like protect us from things that, you know, could be harmful to us. They also trusted God. They knew that God was bigger than them, and God was bigger than us, and God was bigger, and God loved us even more than they did, and God was going to protect us. And so they could trust us trust that we were pursuing God, and that God would be with us as we went, and as we watched movies or listened to music or read books or whatever it was, you know.
Which is how they could do that, because one of the things that I struggle with Christians coming to LA is their families are so against some books, movies, television, because it threatens their faith, instead of, which I so adore your perspective of, you can grow in your faith by watching movies, by watching television, by reading books, by embracing art, because God is in there. And how do we find him? And that's what I think is so exciting. And then to find out you come from a hometown of 700 people, and you have this huge understanding of God and culture and faith and film. It's so exciting to me. So I want to jump into your view of film, which is so much my heartbeat, exactly what Jim and I feel impassioned to tell people. And here we read it from you and go, you make it sound so simple. This is just beautiful.
Good.
Your first film I love, How to Talk to a Movie, is so good because, first of all, you say, don't have an opinion of a movie you haven't seen. Second of all, when you watch a movie, don't react. listen, and then respond. Yeah. So I want to start with that to say, as Christians, would you help people who are a little hesitant about films to make them feel comfortable with what this art form can do in us and through us and for us?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for saying nice thing about the books. That How to Talk to a Movie book I wrote because I wanted there to be a very basic introduction to this way of approaching films, and there's a lot of good books that are about that. They're often a bit more academic, and I wanted something that was really basic. It came out of conversations with my youngest brother, who's 12 years younger than me, and he was in college at the time, and we'd talk on the phone, and he loved going to movies because he's part of my family, and he was trying to work that out, like how do you watch movies as a Christian and all that kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, man, if I could just sit down for 2 hours with Micah and talk to him about some of this stuff, like I could get him set right, like his feet set right, the way he wants his feet to be set. And so the book came out of that. It was like very short and brief, something you can read in a couple of hours, and it just positions you correctly.
It does.
For that kind of encounter. It positions you to be able to, maybe encounter God at the movies. And, it comes out of a firm conviction that I have that, we often approach movies as if they are just consumer products, like a box of Kleenex or something. And they're not. It's a work of artistic endeavor made by artists, made by people. And so movies, though they are like probably the most corporate communal act of art making that there is, it's still people behind it who, like any other person, like that people have questions, they have concerns, they have joys and loves, and they put that into their art. And so the first thing I always want to remind people of is that, like, that movie was made to express these things by these people. There's personality behind it, there's personality in it. There's questions and concerns and prayers and however else you want to
and questions.
It.
So many filmmakers ask questions in their films.
They do, and mostly questions. And I think a lot of Christians approach films, movies, as that they're trying to convince you of something.
Yeah. They've got an agenda.
An agenda, yeah, and they don't. Most of the time, and there are movies that have an agenda, but most movies are more just posing a question and exploring that question and trying to figure out the answer to that, like why something in the world happens the way it does, or why the filmmaker feels a certain way about something, or any number of things. And if you start from a place of, I think, recognizing that, it, I think, puts you in a place where you're willing to listen, as if you're having a conversation like we are right now with that filmmaker. And part of the ethical positioning is to let them speak first, as if you invited someone into your home. We talk about movies that we go to be entertained by films, and I like to kind of flip that and say that we actually entertain movies. Is that hospitality kind of idea of we welcome them into our home, we listen to what they have to say, their questions, concerns, by watching their movie, and then we respond, and maybe we're not responding directly to the filmmaker, but we can respond to what we've seen, to what they've said to us, and we can respond. And some things we can say, yeah, I agree with you about that, and some things we can say, I don't agree with you about that part of this.
Right.
And here's
and
what
that's
mine
okay.
That's totally
you can
fine.
have a different opinion and learn from it, or listen,
that's
or
right.
decide if you understand it or agree or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it also primes us to have those conversations with people in our lives who aren't filmmakers, who are just
on any topic,
because they have questions and concerns too. And it's kind of that thing my parents modeled, that more open position towards the world, believing that God is active in the lives of the people, in the filmmakers' lives, in the lives of the people that we know, and being ready to do our part in sharing Christ with them in our relationships. Yeah.
Right, and not looking at it as us and them.
That's right.
But we're all beggars giving each other bread. We're all trying to figure this out. And so if we hear a different perspective, how does it impact us? Mm-hmm. And your concept of approaching a film with hospitality, Jim and I for decades have said, Christians are so worried about all the different spiritual gifts that God's given us. They don't worry about hospitality. Yeah. Hospitality is what makes people feel loved, is what opens up their hearts, is what allows them to discuss things they maybe not even thought about before, feel feel secure in a relationship with they maybe never have experienced before. And when you said that, I realized Jim and I loved to have people over to our house to have dinner, to watch films, just to come over and talk. And one young man not long ago came over and said, I've been in LA for 8 years and I have never had a meal in a home.
Wow.
And I thought, that's the same way with films. People watch film after film. Have they ever had the freedom to talk about it, to ask questions about it, to get feedback, to think about how did that impact me? Is God in that film? What is that filmmaker trying to say? Those are all parts of hospitality, and I just thought that was brilliant. I'd never thought about that before. So
good.
It's very exciting.
Yeah, that's good. Well, you know, it's a spiritual discipline throughout the Bible, the practice of hospitality, and it was very transformative to me when I learned that in seminary and did that. I traced it through the Bible to see how it develops and all that kind of stuff. It really I could see how that idea is really at the heart of Scripture. I mean, so much so that, like, you know, when you get to Jesus, like Jesus performs the ultimate act of hospitality. He offers himself, his body and blood, to the group to create the group. Like, it's like you can't get more hospitable than that.
You can't.
You know,
Yeah.
It's like right at the heart of everything. And you know, a good thing about hospitality too is like that idea of welcoming people into your home. Like, if you welcome people into your home, they can say what they want to say. You don't have to accept everything that they say. It's good to be in conversation with them, though, and it's good to love them and listen to them and all that. And that's what we can do with movies.
Yes,
the same way.
Listen to a movie. I mean, to really hear what it's saying is so important, which is why I love your next 4 books, The Icons of Cinema. Just amazing. That you have taken specific directors, specific films, and said, let's break this down and see what could be going on in their lives. What are they trying to say? What can we learn from them? Your Come and See book, I know that that's very exciting. 250 films that you've put as devotionals to look at these films and say, what is God saying through these filmmakers? What got you to do that? What excites you about that?
Yeah, there was a specific moment in time where I realized I was going to do that. I was out on a walk with my wife one afternoon, and I could take you to the spot. It was like we walked around a corner, and there was a question, almost like there was a question in front of me on the sidewalk that I realized I wanted to answer. And the question was, in How to Talk to a Movie, I tell people, like, you do this, like, you can encounter God, you know, and encounter the lives of these filmmakers and all that kind of stuff, that God is active. I believe that God is active in these filmmakers' lives and in the history of cinema and all this stuff, right? But the question I was confronted with was, if I were to look at the greatest, quote-unquote, greatest films of all time, the way that the medium has developed over time, the filmmakers that have had the most influence, if I did that systematically, would I see evidence of God's Spirit at work in their lives and in the life of cinema as it's developed? And so it was like almost like an exploratory thing. I wanted to go see if I could find God there.
That's a big question.
It is, yeah. I told people you could do it, but I was like, I better just do this now.
Better do it myself,
Yeah, really do it systematically. And so in Come and See, that's what I did. I took a bunch of lists of the greatest films of all time made by film groups all over the world over the past, like, 50 years. And I cross-referenced those lists and, like, got that down to a kind of a cohesive canon where everyone says these are the greatest movies. And because I didn't want it to be my list, I wanted to really look at the lists that everyone says matter more, matter the most.
Viewers, critics, everybody.
Everybody, yeah. And so I got that list of movies together, and then I also I did one thing. I looked at that list of movies, and the problem with any kind of canon like that, historical canon like that, is people tend to repeat, like, always say the same movies are great all the time, and so that can tend over time to, like, leave filmmakers and film movements out of what we consider great. And so I was like, well, what's missing here? And what was missing from that list mostly were films made by black filmmakers, films made by women, and films from Africa and South and Central America were mostly missing from that list. And so I did more research. I found more lists of great films made by all those different groups, cross-referenced those together, and added those movies to the list, and that's how I got to 250. And so the list, it seeks to be comprehensive of what cinema has done all over the world. over the past 120 years. And then I watched those movies, and I wrote about them, and I looked for where God might have been in the way that movie was made at that moment in time, and what God might be saying to us now through those films.
And what answer did you get to the big question that led you to do this to begin with?
Yeah, I definitely saw that God was there in all their lives, and in the filmmakers' lives, and in these moments. And I learned that God was often there in really surprising ways, and often there not necessarily in the story of the movie, like the basic plot kind of what moral would you take away from this story kind of thing. God was often there in the way the film was made and the way that they told the story, like where the focus was. So like you look at something like Italian neorealism, and like how that came to be. And it was Italian filmmakers who, post World War II, were seeing the films that were being made in their country, and they were all only films about the rich and powerful. They were called white telephone films because of the preponderance of white telephones in these movies.
Wow.
And Roberto Rossellini and Vittorio De Sica, they looked at this like, this is not what's going on in people's lives, and we need to make a different kind of movie that shows what's actually happening in the lives of Italian people. And so that intention, coupled with a technological breakthrough where cameras were smaller and cheaper and could go places cameras couldn't go to before, and microphones and sound equipment. There's always a technological aspect to every advance in cinema history, led to a cinematic movement called Italian neorealism, where they were able to take their cameras to the streets, film real people, tell stories that were about people on the margins, and tell them in a really a very honest way. That showed both the good parts of their lives and the parts of their lives that weren't so great, but just really honest. Mm-hmm. And they become they're convicting films, because you watch them and you think, oh gosh, we should do something to help these people, and change the systems that are like that are working injustice in their lives. It lifts them up, a camera's attention is a lifting mechanism. And so like you watch so I see that, I'm like, well, God is definitely there, like that's the least of these. And what we do for the least of these, we do for God, and this is an aspect of that. And once I saw that, once I saw the kind of the formal elements of what that movement was, well, then you can start seeing it as it moved forward through time, and filmmakers who worked in every era since then who copied some of those same conventions and used it to point out what's going on in people's lives now. And so you can see, so it wasn't like, maybe I thought there would be like a straight line thread of God helping the art form to develop over time. And what I really found was it was kind of like walking into a garden. And in this garden, there were all kinds of amazing things going on. And you can walk around and say, well, praise God for that, and for that, and for that, and for that. Because all of these amazing things that have been happening in cinema are ways of God loving the world and wanting us to love the world better. It was really encouraging and exciting.
Oh, it is, and that big question. I mean, to know that you can answer it just by watching films is amazing. Yeah. And it reminds me, we know that artists are prophets, and prophets either reflect what's going on in culture or project what they see coming. Yeah. And that's what I see you keep bringing up in your films, of either what's happening in culture at that time, and the filmmaker is reflecting that, or they see beyond and are really pushing, people say, oh, they're pushing the envelope. But they're really pushing our thought of what's possible, what's to come, what is a bigger perspective than just what we see right now. Yeah. And what a valuable tool that is to see that in films.
Yeah. Andrei Tarkovsky said that, movies are sculpting in time, time sculptures, and in the sense that you're working with moments. The filmmakers are working with moments and then putting those moments together. And so cinema is a very now thing. Like, it's very, even when you watch when we write about movies, we write about movies in the present tense always. What happens in the movie, because every time you watch it, it's like it's happening now. And God, when God is asked God's name, God says, "I am." God is present, and I think that when you watch movies this way, or watch them with that kind of intense presence, you end up getting situated now. In the same way that God is situated now. So like, movies aren't, again, they're not boxes of Kleenex. They're something that comes out of a moment in time. And they speak to us in this moment in time. Even when they're old movies, they still continue to speak to us. I was meeting with a group. There's a movie group in Florida that is using my book for their movie watch class, and they invited me to come to their class via Zoom. And the first film they watched was 2001: A Space Odyssey, and it was so much fun. I mean, a lot of people in the class had seen 2001 in theaters when it first premiered, and hadn't watched it since then. And they were talking about what it was like to watch it then, and then what it's like to watch it now. And they were saying how even a movie made in the 1960s still feels incredibly current when you watch it now, and it's true.
Like good art is timeless,
good art
right?
is, yeah.
Yes.
And you just gotta listen and be open and respond. Yeah.
It's so great. Well, you have 3 favorite, or at least at this moment, 3 favorite icons that you've written about.
Yeah.
You've written about Christopher Nolan. You've written about Del Toro and
Hayao Miyazaki.
I have to laugh at that. I'm going to say it right. I know it. I'm sure you have a lot of directors that you're passionate about and you see in their films. Can you tell us what we should be looking for in a director when we watch a film? I don't think people think about the director. I think they just think about the story, or the characters, or what's being said, or what grabs you about the actual director of these films?
Yeah, it's a good question. Those books that you're talking about, it's a little kind of side series that I started doing. So Come and See is it's 250 movies, it's 150,000 words, it's a big book, right? And it doesn't take what they call an auteurist lens on cinema. It takes more of a historical lens on cinema. But there is a lot you can glean from looking at one filmmaker's all of their work. And if you watch all their movies and think about them in context with one another, you got to see repeated themes and repeated imagery and repeated story structures and all that kind of stuff. And you can really, I think, learn a lot about what matters to them, the kind of questions they're trying to answer, the things that excite them, what they want us to see. You can learn to see what they want us to see, I think, when you do that. And I chose those filmmakers to start with, partially because I really love their movies. I mean,
they're 3 greats. Oh my goodness, yes.
I always look forward to a new film from any of them. So I'm also working on a new one right now that's going to be on James Cameron. And so, looking at those 4 filmmakers, it's hard to. I can't think of any other science fiction or fantasy filmmakers working over the past 30 years who have been as influential as them. And I think we've been in a time of sci-fi fantasy filmmaking, kind of a high time for that for a long time too, at least for the last 20 years, probably a little longer than that. And so it seemed like a good way to both kind of understand what's going on in our own culture by looking at these movies, and why these filmmakers and these films are so popular, and just learn more. But they continue to be influential. They have movies coming out all the time that people love to see. So it was a good group to look at. And it's so funny too. The researcher writer in me also just really enjoys picking a path, and then what can I learn as I go down this path? And it's always surprising to me that the things that I learned that I didn't know I was going to learn when I start down the path. So Miyazaki, who does My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away and all these great Ghibli films. He's
great animation. Oh
yeah,
my goodness.
And I would be happy to make the argument that he's the greatest animator. That's not even hardly an argument, but even maybe the greatest filmmaker who's ever lived. And I wouldn't mind having that discussion. But he, doing that little book on him was a challenge because his perspective on life and the world is very different than mine. More so than Del Toro or Nolan, who they grew up in the Western world, and they grew up in Christian context, and Miyazaki did not. I mean, he Japan and kind of the eddies of various religions that are popular in Japan, and he was a avowed Marxist when he was younger, and so there's just a lot of things that are very different than me about him. And so coming to understand him and what's driving his filmmaking and the things that concern him, the questions he has, was a pretty big journey, harder than Del Toro and Nolan. He But, going down that path led me to learn a lot about Japanese culture and the kinds of myths that shape Japanese culture, the kinds of fairy stories he read as a kid. I learned a lot about beetles and bugs. There's a lot of bugs in Japan, and they have a whole cultural thing around bugs where you can buy like pet bugs in vending machines and stuff. Like, it's a whole thing that I did not understand before I started this, and it helped me understand why there's so many bugs in his movies, because it's just part of Japan. So little things like that were really fascinating, and really by doing that, this is the thing too, where I didn't want to over Christianize his movies, because they're not coming from a Christian perspective,
right?
But I did want to look for the places where his convictions overlapped with my convictions. I wanted to celebrate that and thank God for that, and respond devotionally to it. And I think I worked that out in the text. It was, like I said, it was a challenge, but I'm pretty satisfied with how it turned out. And,
you should have. You really should have. Yes.
So it's fun. It's fun to. You ask about like why looking at a director's body of work is helpful. How is it helpful? And it's that, like, it's kind of like back to the thing my parents said again. It's like we all have different perspectives on God or on the world, and if we don't pay attention to other people's perspective like that, we miss aspects of what God is doing in the world. So
it's so true.
It's the way to do it.
Well, do you have anything you want to tell our audience that's a passion of yours, that you've learned or that you're seeking an answer to, or that is important to understand?
Oh, I always want people to remember that the movies are made by people, and when you're watching a movie, you're watching the work of people's hands, and people with questions and concerns and prayers of their own, and that we should respond to the films lovingly, as if we are loving those people, because we are. And when we respond to movies as if they're antagonists in our lives, or if we're in competition with them to like win the hearts and minds of people, then we're making enemies out of people, and that's not what God wants us to do. And we should love them and respond to movies out of that kind of love. I always want people to think that and remember that mostly.
That is so good. That's
why I love like what Hollywood Prayer Network does too in praying for creatives. It reminds us that it's people. It's not just products, it's people. Yeah.
Oh, it's so true. So one last thing, tell us about the Come and See daily devotional.
Yeah, I will. It's weekly.
Weekly, okay.
Weekly. So this is a big book with a lot of film devotions in it, and I'm proud of this work. It was a lot of work. It's good.
It's beautiful.
But as I wrote it, I realized there was probably maybe a better way to interact with this material than just reading the book. And so I created a email subscription, a completely free email subscription that people can sign up to, that sends out one devotion from this book every Sunday morning. And so it goes chronological, the email subscription. Whenever you start with the earliest films ever made, and then every week one more comes through. So it's a 5-year-long email subscription.
Wow.
If you sign up for it. It's a lot of fun. It's bite-sized, so like it's one at a time. So if you want to watch the film that you read about during the week, you have plenty of time to do so before the next one comes around. Or you just learn a lot by reading them too, reading the devotions too. When I realized I could do that I could build that, and that it would be, I think, a fun way to interact, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely doing that. Even if I never publish this as a book, I want this email subscription thing to exist, because it's a neat thing. So that's if people want to know about that, it's comeandseeguide.com. We'll get you there. Comeandseeguide.com. And
well, I am there, and I love it. And thank you so much for being here. I could just keep asking questions. We have to have you back again. It's really wonderful to see your perspective and your love for film and your love for God, and it's really great. We want to thank you so much for listening to Elijah Davidson and his passion and love for God and films. And I thank you for joining us at Hollywood Changemakers. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much for joining us. We don't want to lose you, so please get involved. Find out about our prayer call sheets, how you can get a prayer partner, get the updated news of what's going on in Hollywood, and even connect with our local chapters. So join us at HollywoodPrayerNetwork.org.